Awesome. Well, great. First of all, thank you for doing this, Yannick. Welcome to Building Effective Data Teams, featuring, you get your last name right?
I just lost you for a second.
Oh, that's okay. I'm sorry. No worries. Anyways, but I have Yannick here with me. I'll let you introduce yourself in a second, but to introduce myself, I'm Tyler. I'm a senior consultant at Analytics 8. Analytics 8 is a premier independent data analytics consulting firm. We've got services that run the gamut from data management, analytics being more front-end BI stuff, as well as data governance, which is a new service offering from us, and then data strategy, which is somewhat relevant to what we're talking about today. Part of that, we talk about talent strategy and who to hire and stuff like that. So with that, if you have any questions, feel free to plug them into the chat. We'll be monitoring them, and you can ask questions of Yannick directly or myself too, and we'll make sure to try to get to those throughout the course of the conversation. Without further ado, though, Yannick, why don't you introduce yourself, your role, what you're currently doing? Yeah.
Sure. So I'm Yannick. I'm head of engineering for go-to-market. Go-to-market domain of Roche, which is sales, marketing, digital, omni-channel. So we're kind of the last mile between the products and the healthcare system and the doctors and the entire hospitals, etc. So we're the last mile, and my role there is head of engineering and mostly focused on data analytics part. So all the interactions with the healthcare system. So it's pretty interesting area there for Roche. Also, it's a pretty interesting area because it's dynamic. It's really moving fast. There's a lot of things happening. So of course, we are in the storm of the digital transformation, right? And of course, also the healthcare systems, they're getting more digital. Also, the interactions with the hospitals and the doctors need to get more personalized. So there's more and more pressure also to become better in data and analytics. So we have built a data and analytics platform in the last 3 years to accommodate for all this need that they're coming there. And we're mostly focusing on BI, but also we have 4 or 5 machine learning applications now that are in production on the realm of next best actions and recommendation systems. So also there we're heavily invested.
Lovely. Appreciate that. Just for context for the viewers, Yannick and I have actually had the pleasure of working with one another for, I don't know, how long has it been? Over a year, something like that.
Yes.
But yeah, and it's been awesome. This really today is about questions that I wish I would have asked you probably a long time ago, just about like leadership and building teams and stuff like that. But I appreciate that overview. It really helps set context of the space you're operating in, and kind of the scale you're operating at today. And we'll definitely get into some of the challenges to transformation and how you get people up to speed in new technology. But I'd first like to ask a little bit about you. You have an interesting background. You were actually recently on the Analytics Engineering podcast with Tristan and Julia. And I don't want you to just run through your resume necessarily, but talk to me about how you kind of started to get into data. Because I know you have some experience. You did a lot of like high performance computing stuff, doing like, research at universities and stuff like that. But yeah, how did you get into data? Or maybe easier, when was like the first time you had to debug a SQL script or something like that?
Funnily enough, when I first started my first job in private banking in Switzerland, I started as a data scientist, and of course, back in the days, I was very naive. I was really thinking that SQL is going to go away, right? I was like, okay, there's new cool stuff out there. I will never need to write the SQL in my life because we have Spark and all that cool stuff. Well, didn't quite turn out that way, but the entry was really through data science. And I think for me, what was fascinating is trying to solve real world problems with data, right? And I mean, maybe that was a bit of of my origin in physics, where you also try to abstract the real world and try to predict also. So I think also in data you have a similar setup, right, where you try to find insights from data, and then try to apply this. And for me also the applications were a very important part, not only finding the insights, because I think otherwise I would have stayed in academia, but to really apply it, that was important to me too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that I've actually been thinking about a lot recently, like the ability to use data that's like matching something of like the physical world, as opposed to just, data about like, a CRM system or interactions, but really data like coming from sensors is like, I'm thinking about like a little side project I might try to stand up on like a Raspberry Pi or something like that. But do you ever feel like you kind of miss the physical measuring things about physical reality and stuff like that, or is it more, it's not a concern to you anymore?
No, I mean, it is just a lot simpler if you can, if you have just physical things, IoTs. It's a lot simpler if you throw people into the mix. You were mentioning the CRM system, right?
Mm-hmm.
It gets much more complicated because people might use this transactional system in different ways. So you introduce a lot of inconsistencies already, and that is even more challenging. So sometimes I miss it, but it's also great to have this challenge, this extra challenge. Sometimes it's a bit too much, and sometimes I think it's also important to start to introduce or teach people more on the analytics mindset. But in general, I think there's enough hard problems to solve that I'm still passionate about.
Yeah. And actually might want to hone in on the analytics mindset a little bit more. Today's conversation is not about data quality necessarily, but expand upon that. What does that mean to you, analytics mindset, and building that within an organization? I assume it's maybe people from outside of the data team, but what does that look like or mean to you?
It's really connected to designing the process.
Mm-hmm.
So also to give a very simple example, to design the CRM system, to design a transactional system. Now you could, as an input, have a free text field, or you can have a drop-down field, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, if you put the free text field there, that is great, but it's also from an analytics perspective, not so great. So I think if you already have in mind that you need this data for analytics, you might design your transactional system different, or you might design your business process different so that you can actually capture the data. So for me, that's what I mean by analytics mindset, is that you start very early on in designing the transactional or the business process itself with already analytics in mind. And I think that's one of the biggest differentiator between the new tech companies and the more legacy companies, that the new tech companies, they have really figured this out. So everything they do, they put data first as a first class citizen, and they know that analytics is key for success.
Yeah, and that's I've seen it work actually really well in practice. That somewhat of like a feedback loop. So people who are actually operational and entering data, their ability to see or even have some impacts, like they're tracking KPIs about their role, that feeds into some sort of performance review or something like that. I found that feedback loop to help a lot with almost enhancing data quality and stuff like that. But again, I don't want to go all the way down that down that rabbit hole. But anyways, let's kind of talk about, so as I understand it, maybe you can kind of talk just a little bit about how this data platform, the current platform that you're working in now, started. But talk to me a little bit about like the beginnings of that and assembling a small little team, and just talk me through what that process was like. And if there are any like hiccups along the way too, I'm happy to hear like challenges and stuff as well.
Yeah, so when we first started with one use case, and we also used that use case to build in parallel also the platform to support it. So it was really when I joined, I realized very quickly that we could not do all this really cool ML stuff that I wanted to do. So that's why I almost took that use case as an excuse to build also the infrastructure and the platform to support it. But of course, nobody will give you 10 million to build a platform. So I think the important aspect was, okay, how can we show incremental value and how can we build a platform that evolves with more use cases? Because I kind of already anticipated that we're going to be successful. So, okay, you need to get, prepare for that as well. So you need to have the scalability mindset as well, and then try to evolve the use case and the platform together. So over time, we added more and more use cases into the mix, and also we're able to scale the platform accordingly, which I think was a very good strategy because it showed also this incremental value. So it was really like, okay, we started small, and tried to evolve the platform based on the additional use cases that we kind of already anticipated, right? So it was really over time, an investment over time, not like a big bang approach.
Yeah.
But of course, there's also challenges to that, right? So you need to be very, very forward looking and need to see what use cases make sense. Where do you draw the boundary? Sometimes, or many times, I also needed to say no to use cases because they were not really aligned with the strategic goal that I had in mind. And
Yeah.
of course, it's always difficult to say no because people are like, here is money, here is resources. I want to be on the platform. You're like, no, no, not yet, right? So it's also a bit tricky to navigate around that. But I think to pick the right use cases, to have a clear strategy, clear goal, and then also break it down to little steps. This is key, but it's of course it's not so easy to do.
I like that piecemeal approach a little bit, and I feel like growing from that perspective is maybe more sustainable, right? When you first were starting this platform, was most of the consideration of the people? I guess maybe explain how I don't know how big the team was when it first started out and how you kind of came together, but was most of the consideration there just technical skills? Can you actually stand up some stuff on AWS for us and then help us build a platform that's going to work? Or was there some considerations to like looking forward ahead, we need to have a leader, or really you were just that person and you knew that was going to be the case?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, I was looking for those unicorns really that could do cloud, but also new data warehouses. So I was looking for a really strong tech talent because I knew to pull this off, I need really the best people. And that's why also the interview process was quite tough. So I don't know that the probably first like 40 guys I interviewed myself, and I was very picky. Dynamic to perform in a small team there. So it was tricky to hire, I would say, but at the same time, once you have a good critical mass of really great people, of course, great talent, they attract also great talent, right? And at some point, this is a great dynamic. So I think in the beginning, it's extremely important to have a strong technical team to help you pull this off.
Yeah. Wow. Fascinating. I love that you did the hiring on your own. That's great. Talk to me a little bit about, as you were starting to, the team was starting to grow a little bit, you're hiring more folks, maybe you're not doing the interviewing anymore either. Talk to me a little bit about org structure in terms of like centralization of different skills, as well as like matrix structure. This is something you talked to me about before in the past. This is something you settled on, but it kind of seemed like it was a lesser of two evils sort of decision. Maybe it wasn't, you weren't finding exactly what you were looking for. So talk to me a little bit about, organizing people to grow this thing.
Yeah, and before I go there, I think again
Yeah.
for me, organizing people, it's also very closely related to the processes. And
Hmm.
for example, a big game changer 10 years ago was in the data industry when you could switch from ETL to ELT. So that is a huge change in process. That
Hmm.
means you can separate things out, right? So in ELT, you extract load and then you do the transformation afterward. So it's a completely different process. That means also you have new opportunities now to align your team to this specific process that you didn't have before, right? So here, I mean, the way we design the teams is basically also a reflection on the abstraction that we can do on the process side.
Hmm.
So those things always come together, and the matrix structure for us reflects also the possibilities that we have on the process side. So we have what we call data engineering teams that are only responsible for onboarding the data. So they bring the data to the platform. They don't necessarily understand the data and the logic of the data, but they don't need to because they need to be very good in JDBC API and infrastructure as a code, right? So they are specialized on those aspects. And then we have the business analysts or the analytics engineers. They're more focused on the data transformation part. So they implement the data pipeline once the data is on the platform. And of course, then we have also people that are more specialized in visual analytics. In
Hmm.
our case, also a capability that is related to ML engineering because we have MLOps applications, or we have one important capability which focus only on DevOps and the developer experience, I would say. So
Hmm.
I think this is also very important to point out, right? And then we have the projects or products rather, and they can consume from this different capability, as you mentioned, to so that we end up in this metrics setup. And I think here you were mentioning it, decentralization versus centralization, etc. For me, it's how can you keep your teams aligned but still loosely coupled, right? And this metrics organization is helping to some extent because the products, of course, they want to deliver new features super fast, they want to release fast, etc. And the
Yeah.
platform, basically, you want to have reusability, you want to have standards, you want to really make sure that things are done properly, right? So there's a bit of a friction because you have conflict of interest. And that's why we choose this matrix organization to trying to mitigate as best as we can.
Hmm. Talk to me a little bit about like communications across this team, what you have in place. Obviously, I know, but I'd love to hear your take on, and maybe some of this is process, but what communication looks like in the organization, especially given the structure. There's probably a lot of handoffs, I would assume, on different projects and tasks, right?
Yes. I would really say, for me, was important from the very beginning is that to have a community. So
Yeah.
even though we have this matrix organization, it was important for me that everybody is part of our engineering community.
Mhm.
And of course, in this engineering community, you have the specialties, but it's not that you create silos. And for the communication aspect, and this is probably extremely difficult, and I'm not saying we have completely figured this out, but of course, tools like Slack, they help a lot with the communication. But of course, also that is not perfect. But beyond communication, I would also want to highlight another aspect that for me is important, which how do you create trust between the teams, which for me is even more important, right? Especially if you grow your teams, naturally things will be a bit fragmented as we have it with the matrix organization as well, right? So but still, like, how can you make sure that people are trusting each other with the work they're doing and how they feel as a community? I think this is the interesting part, right? It's really creating common understanding and creating this community feeling that I think is truly important, because to efficiently communicate is tricky. So relying on a community style is helping a lot there.
Mm-hmm. And I should go without saying, I think, especially being a European-based company, there's a lot of different backgrounds and people from different walks of life that are coming to work with you. And so I don't think it can be understated to try to get everybody on a common platform, and communicating, working together is of utmost importance, right? So I do want to talk a little bit about, Roche is a large organization. I don't think that's any sort of secret. We talked a little bit about your background and getting into data and some legacy systems and stuff like that. How have you approached people coming to the platform? You use DBT. We'll actually be speaking at Coalesce, you and I together. You're using a lot of more modern software tools, I guess we'll say, to do data and analytics. Excuse me. And so, what does it look like for you in upskilling folks to be proficient in new technologies, especially given some legacy decisions and software that has been in place for a long time? People come to you, with a lot of different backgrounds in terms of, tool sets and stuff like that. What does onboarding look like historically, and how have you thought about some of those kinds of things?
Yeah, I think it's a very important aspect, but for me, it even starts very early in having the right people with the right mindset in your team. And what I mean by that is really people that want to grow, people that want to learn, people that are really keen to develop themselves, right? So that's also was a key aspect in bringing people on board, is to have this learning mindset. Now, when you have that, then of course it's much easier to help with the upskilling. Now, on the upskilling, I think there's multiple aspects. Certain things I think you can do within the team itself.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, we have like a study group for the DBT certifications now. So there's hopefully 20 guys getting certified in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So there's certain aspects that you can do within, but then I mean we also needed help outside. I mean, that's why we also gladly work with Analytics 8, right? So I think also consultants can help you to try to establish best practices about new tools. So I needed to bring also AWS consultancies, because we had some guys that were good in AWS, but not enough to really drive this, right? So I think also working with consultant companies is an important aspect in the upskilling strategy. What is important really is that you have, if you work with external companies, also some kind of knowledge transfer strategy, right? I think for me, it doesn't make sense to bring somebody in, build a solution for you, and then you don't know how this works, and your people don't understand what was built, right? So that's why for me, upskilling also means to engage with external vendors to help you to get there.
Yeah, hiring lifelong learners is definitely something that we do at Analytics 8. Never met more people in a company that just want to keep learning and learn new tools and learn new things about just anything, even can be outside of work. So that's usually a really good indicator to be hiring for, is people who continually want to grow and have a growth mindset. So that's awesome. Definitely something I wanted to highlight here. I do have a few more questions. There is one in the chat that I might try to get to. It says, will building effective data teams be related to the fourth industrial revolution? I don't know how much of a history buff you are, such that engineering should be integrated with data science. Maybe you could talk a little about some like the ML ops roles and stuff like that you have going on too.
I mean, maybe I'm probably able to get the question in slightly wrong, but then Tyler just push me in the right direction. But I wanted to start to answer that question also from the perspective that I truly believe that we also need to bring IT and business closer together. Mm-hmm. And I think historically in the last years, this gap only got bigger and bigger, right? So that's also why many companies, have a business unit and an IT unit, and they're separate, right? Now, what we are trying to do also in Roche GTM is really trying to bring these things much, much closer together. So, I mean, we have engineers that sit in business. We have more like business function that sit in IT, right? I personally, I love this momentum of bringing together business and IT more. And for that, of course, you need to upskill the business folks on IT side. And of course, also you need to teach the IT guys more business language, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it is really on both sides that you need to work to bring this closer together. But for me, really, hopefully in 10 years, we don't have to distinguish between IT and business anymore because every business is getting more digital, right? So for me, it's very a consequence really that this convergence needs to happen. But of course, historically, a lot of companies are still set up in a very rigid, old school, IT versus business discussions.
Yep. Yep. This is something I struggle with in my career. And I think it's actually partly why like a tool like DBT has been something that I've always fell in love with, is that, it takes an analyst and more business minded folks and allows them to work more on the engineering side of things. And so, anyways, not to take the conversation down that path, but I think maybe the simpler way to ask that question is, is data the new oil, or do you see that like companies that are more data and like digital forward are going to be the, come out ahead as winners at the end of the day and survive the longest kind of thing?
I think it's not about the quantity of data, but it's more like what you do with the data, right? So again, this goes back to what we talked before about having an analytics mindset, right? So it's not that you need to collect, all the data in the world and then you don't know what to do with it, or you collect all the data, but it's garbage in, garbage out. So I think really to understand why are you collecting this data, and understanding the business process that you want to optimize. I think for me it's key, right? So that's why I personally think there's multiple aspects here. So it's not only about collecting data for the purpose of collecting data. Right?
Yeah. I know we're getting close to time here, but there is a couple more questions. I do want to get to this one. Do you see much interaction with business users and quote citizen data scientists with the advent of AI gaining steam? I think maybe, do you see sophisticated analytics and data science becoming more democratized? It's an interesting question.
What we're trying to do also when we talk about AI and machine learning, I think many people, they focus on AI and machine learning too much. But the true thing for me is that for AI and machine learning, you need to have good, reliable data. You need to have a solid foundation, a data foundation, and then you can try to enable ML ops and maybe even citizen data scientists that for us, we don't have too many of them sitting in the business. But I mean, what we're trying to do is to enable self-service BI. I think this is for us the big next step function that we have. So I would say we're still more on the descriptive part with self-service BI, but for both, like self-service BI and AI ML, you need that solid data foundation. And sometimes I feel like companies want to take a shortcut, but there is no shortcut here, right? So it's very important to focus on getting this foundation right. And I know it's not so sexy, right? Because AI ML, this is the cool stuff. But luckily, we have enough people that also are fascinated by this boring part. But this boring part is also the thing that then ultimately brings the most value.
Yeah, well, I love that. I would love to ask you, so we're almost at time here, but maybe as like a closing question, and maybe it's not on a high note, but what's something, especially in terms of like people and assembling data teams, what's something that you haven't quite solved for yet, or maybe you think you never will be able to solve? I know we talked about like manager and individual contributor tracks and stuff like that, so maybe that's what it is, but I'll let you maybe answer that question in your own words.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy to be in this interface of doing technical stuff, but then also if you want to have an impact, you need to apply the technology to a business problem, right? So it's really great to be here in the interface, but being also at the interface is also challenging, because sometimes I want to focus more on the technology part because I really like technology a lot. But then it's also tricky if you only focus on the technology part, because if you cannot bring along the organization or the enterprise, then it's a waste of time to focus only on technology. So I think sometimes I struggle also myself. Where do I belong? I mean, I don't belong there. And that's also what I meant. I don't belong to IT or business. I'm somewhere in
Yeah.
between. And
Yeah.
this is, of course, also an identity crisis that you need to manage somehow. It's like, okay, what am I, and where do I want to go, right? But it's also an interesting journey, because it creates also a new path. And of course, this is challenging. It's exhausting sometimes, but it's
Mhm.
also exciting.
Yeah. What do you do outside of work to when you're having that identity crisis to just forget about it for a little while?
I mean, luckily, I have some great hobbies. I play football. I'm also a salsa teacher. I travel a lot, and those things they keep me grounded, and
Yeah.
also give me different perspectives, right?
Mhm.
Especially also traveling. I think when you travel, you sometimes realize many things that you when you're caught up in the daily life, you don't. So.
Yeah. Well, I may have to take up some dancing lessons from you. I've gone two-stepping a couple times down here in Texas since moving here, and I am not great at it. But anyways, we can take that up another time. Listen, thank you for being a great sport, and just coming open and ready to answer some great questions. But yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time. How can people reach out to you if they have some follow-up questions? I guess I'll leave it with that with you.
I think the easiest is on LinkedIn. Just
Yeah.
message me on LinkedIn. So happy to follow up on any questions that you might still have.
Awesome. Great stuff. Likewise for me too. I think our LinkedIn account should be connected to the live event. So feel free to reach out. Love to help y'all out and answer your questions if you have any follow-ups. But with that, thank you, Yannick. Appreciate it as always.
Sure. Thanks a lot for having me.
Lovely. Thanks. Bye.